that they're driving out of her group, and her director, Randall Harwood, and we were talking about that. And then after I talked to Janie, I thought, you know, it is a culture about driving a culture of change, but it's also being intentional about the right culture for your group. So Janie recognized that being in the call center, that's got unique challenges, so I'm going to be intentional about creating a culture of fun, excitement. And she talked about the different things they do outside of the office to kind of build that, to counteract what's normally involved in their day-to-day. So create a culture. You know, determine what that culture is and be intentional about it. Communication. We brought this up earlier, that it's important to communicate, and it's important to communicate at each individual's level on our team and to the personality traits of the individuals that are on our team. And to make this point, I want to share a quick story. Michael Faraday was a British physicist and chemist and one of Albert Einstein's heroes. And he is best known for inventing the electric motor in the 1820s. After performing an experiment in the 50s during which he demonstrated electromagnetic induction, I had to practice that several times just to be able to say it. Faraday was approached by William Gladstone, Britain's Minister of Finance. Okay, Gladstone was impressed by the feat, but he said, what is the practical value of electricity? So think about that question. I mean, think about how you'd answer that question. And Faraday, without skipping a beat, he said, one day, sir, you're going to be able to tax it. Right? Right? So think about it. I mean, Faraday saw the potential in electricity, but this guy didn't care about innovation. This guy cared about building tax revenue. So he spoke it to him in his language. And that's our challenge as leaders, is to be able to speak that in our particular followers in the language that's appropriate for them. And when I visited with Fran, you know, she really gave me that word saturate, because she said, you know, I find we got to communicate the message over and over and over again and make sure everybody at every different level is getting it. And finally, somebody mentioned this as well, is we've got to be good listeners. And I teach active listening, where it's not just listening to what they're saying, but listening to what's not being said. And I can't tell you the number of people that I talked to in the city, in this sample group of 10 that I talked to, that talked about having an open door policy and making it easy for people to come in and talk to them. And as leaders, we've all had people that came in that started to say something, and if we're astute, we can read their body language and say, there's more on your mind than you're telling me. Tell me more. What's really going on? And that's part of listening. It's listening to what's being said, but it's also listening to what's not being said, as well as paying attention to the body language. I want to share a concept with you that I teach. It's called the cycle of success. And I think this will tie it all together for you. And by the way, part of what Bob's doing with the video is at the break, he's going to be available. If you've got some great stories of your leadership style, we'd love to capture them so that we can implement them into our training video. The insight, you know, that you bring in applying these principles is what makes this real to those of us that we're developing within the city and making the stories applicable. So if you would spend a few minutes with Bob, I'd really appreciate that. But this cycle of success is something that I've taught for years, and it's really helped me as I've built high-performing teams. But it starts with the vision. So we've talked about the importance of casting a strong vision, tying it to a strong purpose. And out of that vision, we drive action. We put a plan in place, and our team takes action. Now, if you go back to my Steve Jobs example, that guy I met at church, Steve Jobs cast a powerful vision. Those people bought into it, and as a result, they're working 16 hours a day. So the more powerful the vision, the greater and more precise the action is. Out of that action comes outcomes. Sometimes those outcomes are positive, and sometimes those outcomes aren't so good, right? Any bold vision is going to be challenged with setbacks. But where the leader makes their money is by giving the proper meaning to those outcomes. Taking those outcomes and learning from them, and then changing our approach and using that to strengthen the vision and strengthen this cycle of success. And we keep going around this cycle to the goal. So let me share with you a couple stories that I hope will help bring this to life for you. I'm going to tell another Steve Jobs story. When he came up with the idea for the iPod, he cast that vision to his team. He said, I want a music player the size of a deck of cards that'll hold 1,000 songs or more. He gave it to his engineering group. They went out and worked on it. They kept bringing in prototypes. Not good enough, not good enough. Keep going, keep going. At one point, the engineer came in and he said, Steve, we've got it as small as we can get it. He goes, this is it. This is as good as it's going to get. And Steve looked at it, and in typical Steve Jobs fashion, he gets up and he walks over and he's got a fish tank in his office. And he drops it in the fish tank. And as it's floating to the bottom, all these bubbles start coming up out of the prototype. And he looks over at his engineer and he says, you see those bubbles? And the guy says, yeah. He says, those bubbles represent air pockets. He said, there's room to further consolidate those components. And I believe you can do it. And send him back to try again. And eventually they got to what became the iPod and ultimately became the iPhone, and kind of the rest is history. But the meaning that Steve could have taken from that is, you know what, you're right. It's not going to get to the goal that I set. Maybe I need to sell. But what Steve did was he held him accountable. He kept going back and trying it again and again. Think of a marathoner. Think of somebody that makes a decision. It's New Year's Eve. Most of us in here are going to probably have a goal to get in shape or exercise or do something more. If you're like me, you won't follow through with it much past the first or second week of January. But you think of somebody running a marathon. So they set a vision. I'm going to go become a marathon runner. So they take off. They take action. They set a plan. Maybe they get Galloway's book. They say, I'm going to start running. I'm going to have a goal to be running 5 miles a week by my 3rd week. They take off and they start running. And they start getting knee pain. They're like, wow, this hurts. Right? So the outcome is I'm getting pain. So what's the meaning to that outcome? Well, the outcome could be, you know what? I'm not cut out to run. Why am I trying to do this anyway? And I could quit. Or the outcome, the meaning could be, I've got to make a new distinction. I've got to find a way to get to that goal. Maybe I need to get a different pair of running shoes. Maybe I need to run a different track. Maybe I need to not run quite so far so fast. Maybe I need to run a mile, walk a mile. But whatever it is, I'm going to change my approach until I find a way to get on track to ultimately get to that goal. Now, when I was talking to folks within the city, I had some great examples of this. When I was talking to Monty, again, he was telling me about that email project. And he said, we started that email project a couple years ago. And he said, the problem is that we all have PST or local directories on our hard drive. When there's a personal information request, it's costing us a fortune and it's a pain to find these emails that are tucked away. So we went with this email archive system. And he said we started implementing it, and it looked like it was going to go great guns. We got a couple departments rolled out, and the vendor sold. And they sold again. He said they sold 4 times, and they ultimately ended up with HP, who disbanded the project. So he said, now we're stuck with this. But he said, we're continuing to fight. We've got another, so the meaning could be this can't be done. But what they're doing is, he says, we found another solution. We're going to get the project back on track, and we're committed to eventually being able to deliver that solution. I talked to another gentleman, Kevin Kemp, in the Will Rogers Center. And he was telling me that when he came on board, that he saw an opportunity to drive overtime and to drive the use of temp laborers out and save some money for the city. But you can imagine the resistance that he felt like he met when he started to roll that out to his team. Can't be done. We've always used temps. We can't do that work. All these things that he dealt with. So he said, I was really careful when I cast the vision. I didn't want to make it too bold, because I kept saying, well, did you think you could get the whole amount right up front? I'm looking for the big, bold vision. I knew I could go get it right up front. He goes, no, Mark. He goes, I didn't do it that way because I didn't want to scare him. So I told him, let's just start working towards a nibbling and seeing how much we could get. And he said, we got started in and we started making changes in our process. And as we started seeing that we could be successful without using as much, it started building everybody's confidence that maybe we could take almost all of it out. And I know they still use temps, they still have some overtime, but he's made a dramatic impact in the amount that they spend in that area as a result of following a formula similar to this. So this formula has really worked for me over and over again.